a little bit of part-time. No. Sad. 2 minutes, guys. We'll commence in 2 minutes. Have your changes in the ultimate nurse.
Did you send the emails comfort from the Greens?
No.
The Greens to send the email.
What did they send me?
Oh, it's very school stuff. Alex Patal's trying to lobby us.
She came in for the attendance training.
Yeah, I know. She's swapping me for everything. Stick with this. God, we're already giving you up. We're already giving her up preferences. She's got to be a federal MP she's got to be a federal member of Parliament in 3 months' time. Why didn't you just shut up?
Well, she thinks you're a mover and shaker in the new coalition.
That's all. I don't think that is. I don't think that's stuff.
Well, think about it. I mean, Turnbull's re-elected. She's elected. We've got a big candidate. Projects,
Seven properties. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we commence tonight's meeting. Can I welcome you all this evening to City Dover Council meeting for the 21st of March. And I welcome you all this evening. It's great to see some younger faces in the gallery as well, so welcome. There are agendas circulated on the seats, so you're free to take those with you and use them during the course of the evening. Can I ask you, those who've got no mobile phones, please switch them off or put them on silent. And you can leave after your item's been considered or discussed, okay? There's no direct dialogue between the gallery and the councillors, so I expect you to appreciate that. And just for the benefit of those who haven't been here before, questions are now submitted in advance and not taken from the floor. Okay. So we'll commence now. The membership is as listed. Item 1. Apologies this evening, councillors. Any apologies? Councillor Lee.
Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Williams are apologies.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, no, Councillor Williams and Councillor McCarthy has apologies this evening, and I notice Councillor Walsh has vacated the chamber, but he's here. Item 3, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Any conflicts of interest from council this evening? No items. We'll keep proceeding then. Item 4, confirmation of minutes from previous council meetings.
I'll move that.
Move Councillor Greco, second Councillor Lawrence. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Okay, now over to item 5, public question time. We have 2 questions that have been submitted. I'll read the first one. Pardon me. First one's been lodged by Brian Fairman of Preston. The question to council is, and it's in relation to an item tonight, but I will read it. The local community have petitioned for a barbecue in Adams Reserve and wish that it to proceed. Therefore request that option 2 in the council report be agreed to with minor changes around language, remove the words upgrade the and insert the words installation of a. I will briefly respond to that item is being considered this evening, and I understand Councillor Lee will be moving an amendment to that. Councillor Lee, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. So you can stay for that item, or you can watch online if you choose to do so. That's one question, and you'll also get a more detailed written response as a result of that after it's considered tonight by council. Another question lodged is from David Rodriguez. Question is, why does the council remove soccer goals on fields which have not had a cricket club as a tenant? Surely this is an opportunity to reduce spending and give small clubs such as ourselves an opportunity to run quality pre-season training programs. Council response is, at this stage, council offers clubs access to pre-season grounds where available, and the sporting season takes priority over pre-season training requests. Dole Reserve is allocated for use by cricket teams over the summer season. Removal of goalposts provides council's park maintenance teams with the opportunity to reinstate damaged areas, particularly the areas that endure high traffic during long winter sports seasons. grounds that are given an opportunity to rest and rejuvenate, provide a far superior and high-quality service for the duration of the sporting season. So David will get that in the response and probably a little bit more content as well. So I'll pass these on to our Governance Officer as the questions lodged this evening for more detailed responses. Okay, that concludes public question time. We now go on to consideration of reports. First item of consideration is 6.1, 2015-16 mid-year budget review. Councillor Lee.
Call for a suspension of standing orders.
Councillor Lee is called for suspension of standing orders. Or a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Greco, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Carried. Councillor Lee.
Yes, I just want to seek leave of the council to admit the following item as an urgent item for tonight's business. Under urgent business, the council support for Safe Schools policy.
Okay, so Councillor Lee's request an urgent item to be submitted. We've got a seconder for that? Second. Councillor Setters, put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? That item's carried. So Councillor Lee.
Can I call for a division on that, please?
Division, those who supported the matter to be considered as urgent on, please stand. I name Councillor Lee, Councillor Setters, Councillor Fontana, Councillor Greco, Councillor Balala. Those against, please stand. I name Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Walsh. Councillor Lee.
I believe that will be discussed under urgent business, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
So I'll call for a resumption of standing orders.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll now call for resumption of standing orders, seconded by Councillor Greco. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Okay, we now move on to consideration reports 6.1, the 2015-16 mid-year budget review. We have a recommendation there, councillors.
Happy to
Councillor
move.
Oliver Walsh has moved. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second it, Mr.
Second, Councillor Below. Councillor Walsh.
I won't say. Look, I won't say too much. As it's a review, but the review does obviously paint a good picture in relation to council's council's financial position and and you know we're still in a surplus. It's quite a narrow surplus, but we're still in surplus, which is obviously very important. A number of things that we've already decided to do within the mid-year budget is the feasibility study into the Merri Creek footbridge is already being funded through the mid-year budget, I believe, which that's the understanding that I get from officers in accordance to the resolution which I moved last year on at the December meeting. I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Villela, anything to add a second? Any other
straightforward.
speakers or comments from councillors? If not, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item is our 6.2, the rates rebate for specific
I'll second that,
land.
Mr. Mayor.
Move Councillor Villela, second Councillor Greco. Councillor Villela.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is pretty straightforward. As councillors would know, and for the benefit of those in the gallery, there are differential rates. There's the residential. There's a normal residential rate that residents pay, and then there's the vacant business land rate and the vacant residential land rate. So what they pay a different rate. So what this report is about, Mr. Mayor, is there was a slight anomaly in the way that our previous resolution was written, which didn't allow for vacant residential land for those who, during that year where they pay the rates, they actually get a building permit. So therefore it becomes like a pro rata of when the building permit is given. That's my understanding. So what this does, Mr. Mayor, is just correct an error so that the correct pro rata rate is paid. So this is purely a a correction, if you like, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Villala. Councillor Greco, anything further to say?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, the report also, I think Councillor Lella has explained it quite well. The report also lists the properties that have been affected by this, if you like, this anomaly with the way that we worded our resolution when we passed it some time ago. So a list of properties that have been affected, the properties that will receive a reimbursement in the form of a rebate. It's totaling $101,000, and that's money that's rightly owed back to the community because they've done the right thing. They had vacant land. They got a permit and they're still being charged vacant land rates, which is a higher rate. So that's been fixed. That's really good. And also the motion also amends the wording for any future ratepayers that find themselves in this situation where they get a building permit and change the land from vacant land to land that's got dwellings on it. This will also apply to into the future, so we've actually put that wording in there. So it's actually to fix up the anomaly that was created, which went contrary to the actual initial intent of what we were trying to do.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
I have amendment to the motion.
Could you read it out?
Just at point 5, that Council receives a further report on extending the 12-month timeline on commercial properties to 18 months in line with residential properties.
Is the movement happy with that?
Can you repeat that, Councillor Lawrence? Yeah.
The Council receives a further report on extending the 12-month timeline on commercial properties to 18 months in line with the residential properties.
Happy with that.
Movement, second, happy with that, okay. If you wish to speak, Councillor Lawrence, if not...
No.
No, okay, there's no further
Wait
discussion.
for the report.
This was actually circulated, it actually makes sense to include this additional point. Okay, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. Next item of consideration is 6.3, the Significant Tree Register Community Consultation Outcome. We have a recommendation there from Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move it with a slight addition which I have prepared, and I'll be reading it out, which is basically for Council to receive a report after 6 months of the start of the Significant Tree Register, seeking further community input into the operation of the register, including options for strengthening its effectiveness.
That has been circulated to councillors?
No, sorry.
It's here, okay.
So it's basically adopting it, but seeking a report back in 6 months' time.
Okay, we have a seconder.
I'm happy to second it with an amendment.
Your amendment, Councillor Lawrence?
So will I just pull it up? It was circulated earlier.
Yes, it was.
There it is.
About rebates.
Yes, point 2, which ties in with the request for further review with Councillor Lees, that officers, officers report back prior to the 30th of June with options for free arborist inspections and subsidised significant tree safety audits and pruning options for ratepayers on Commonwealth pensions.
Movement's happy with that, yes. Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. The issue of significant trees has been raised to us, to this chamber in the previous iteration of the council and in the current council, and I know that there are many members of the community who are quite concerned about the loss of significant trees as part of the development process that takes part throughout our municipality. When I was reading through the attached appendice of the report, I was somewhat surprised only 3 submitters put forward their options onto the significant tree register. I think we can do better, and in fact I know we can do better, hence my particular amendment regarding having a 6-month review to see whether we can seek further community input and feedback. Interestingly, I was in the city of Banyule yesterday for one of their festivals because my kids are taking part in it, and there was a development just off Burgundy Street, and right around the tree is a temporary fencing, and there's a specific sign that says that's a designated tree protection zone. So councils in our neighbouring municipalities already have protection zones around trees of significance around their neighbourhoods, particularly around sites that's due for development or redevelopment. And I think it's time that our council can look into some of the best models of practice that's adopted elsewhere. I'll leave it at that. I understand Councillor Lawrence may have something further to say regarding his own amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Lawrence, you wish to speak?
Mr Mayor, yeah, just I have made an amendment to get further information and options from council because I have observed the protection measures operating in the eastern suburbs in the City of Monash and City of Whitehorse, and obviously I've supported Councillor McCarthy in getting this far towards tree protection in the city. One of the unintended consequences, aside from developers ripping out trees too early, is that older residents ended up custodians of trees that they may have planted 50 years ago, and both getting an arborist report can be $1,500 and getting any pruning done to address a significant tree can be a lot of money. So I'm not sure the scope of that, but I do know that there's a lot of older people struggling with it in Monash and in other suburbs where this is operating, and I think we do need to sort of look to help landowners manage some of those trees.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Villela.
Mr Mayor, I'm going to speak against it. And I've had concerns about this for a while, from its inception, and I think we've got to be careful. My issue is that we're talking about private property, Mr Mayor, and I just have a view that there are planning regulations and there are certain things that we need to obviously manage and monitor. But when it comes to trees, I think this is just too broad. And I can understand if there's major development, that there might be some significant trees if it's a big area. But there's no distinction between your standard residential block and a site that is maybe an iconic site where there might be some. I have a problem with it. I do also want to note that there are only 3 written responses, Mr Mayor, which to me is a reflection that maybe, I don't know, something's not quite right with the consultation process, in that only 3 responses. I kind of wonder how passionate people are for it. But I do think that we have to really consider this, because there might be unintended consequences. But there is that fundamental principle that I think is important, is that we're talking private property.
Yeah.
And people are free to do what they wish within the confines of the law. And I don't think we need to add to that. And I just have a fundamental problem with it. If it was site by site, if there's a major site, Mr Mayor, with 3 or 4 significant trees and the community is organised around it, and there's a groundswell, well then maybe, we could take note. But as a blanket policy regarding private property, I'm sorry, I think it will create more problems.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Right on time. Any other speakers on this? Okay, Councillor Seeders.
Yep.
For or against?
Against.
Thank you.
And just in line with the sentiments of Councillor, I think I spoke against this when it was first considered even a year ago or so. Look, the problem with this is about foreshadowing well in advance and perhaps unintendedly triggering a spree of clear felling within the municipality. I don't think that's what we want. I know the Well Hill and people around the corner from my place lopped a fruit tree which probably was standing there for the better part of 50 odd years. So, I can sense where things are going, and I think even Councillor McCarthy, although he's not present and I wouldn't want to speak of his name in vain, mentioned an interesting conundrum which was humorous, but if not sad in the circumstances, where he suggested that the feedback that he'd received from some residents was that the trees were obscuring the efficiency of their solar panels. Well, oh dear. It appears to me that you can't satisfy the environment on both ends. Either the trees stay or the solar panels need to work effectively. I don't know which, and I wouldn't pretend to be Council's foremost resident expert on the environment. But I suspect I know something about shading and how it might affect an appliance like that. Perhaps I digress, but the point being is that clearly, if in the circumstance a tree is to be removed under those circumstances, we can actually say it's not for developmental purposes, it's for other related purposes. So the other consideration is about its administration. If you notice this is an extra level of compliance that this council does not need. We don't have the legislative force to punish anyone for actually removing a tree that may or may not have been designated and if you can look at the report, at the instigation of someone else. So a significant tree is in the eyes of the beholder, councillors. So I would leave it on that point, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Seves. Any other speakers? Councillor Walsh, for or against?
Speaking against.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr Mayor, this is I'm speaking against because fundamentally this is something that my values dictate that I should speak against. I believe that individuals have the right to do as they please if they're not hurting anyone on their property, and it is never ever the role of government, and we are a level of government, to come and intervene in that. And there could be, we've already seen in earlier reports coming to this in terms of the increased, even if it's unintended, there could be an increased level of red tape which could come about as a result of such a policy. So on that regard, there's no way I could support it, and I would urge councillors to think about that when they're in their deliberations tonight. So I'll leave it there, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, Mr Mayor, look, I'll speak in favour of the resolution. I've heard the arguments, and some of the arguments are quite compelling, the arguments against, by Councillor Seves and Councillor Villala and Councillor Walsh. But I think what's being done here, and I take your point, Councillor Seves, is that at the end of the day, and I think it mentions it here in the report, that there's very little enforceability in relation to this. So, given that, it's not that we're compelling, like if we identify a significant tree, we're not compelling at the end of the day residents, to keep that tree, because we really don't have any enforceability powers from what I can read here. So but I think what this exercise does, at least it raises awareness about, some significant trees that are in the city of Darebin. It's an old, there are old suburbs here, and I know for a fact, for example, near La Trobe University, there was a tree there that was still there pre-settlement. Yeah, and some of the and it's been determined by that. One is by carbon testing it, but also some of the signage on the trees, which was done by the indigenous inhabitants, which use the trees as markers for direction. So that's quite important to know that sort of thing. So I think an exercise like this will enable us to identify the trees at least, and so that we can take stock of what's there, and then and hopefully it will, I think, is through awareness and education that will convince ratepayers and residents whether, in the end of the day, they want to keep that tree or not. So I think the exercise is worthwhile, notwithstanding its limitation. The final point that I would make is that we often talk about increasing the canopy of the city, and I think this is just another way of contributing to that.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. As the mover, do you wish to conclude the debate?
Just briefly responding to some of the issues raised, Mr Mayor. I understand that Councillors' concerns as expressed on some of the councillors. However, as Councillor Greco mentioned earlier, we do have an adopted policy to increase our tree canopy coverage. We do know that increasingly, due to the urbanisation and gentrification of our municipality, we are seeing many trees being removed from people's private properties. Councillor Lawrence made a good point in that many of our elderly pensioners do have planted trees from the very early stages of their settlement here. And the last thing they want to do when they move out is to see their tree, which they have personal significance and personal meaning to, attach to that tree, just to be felled without any sort of consideration. I understand we can't enforce it, but I think if the new occupier of the land is made aware of the value of the tree planted by the original person, they might even think twice about it. And if we can do that through our policy, then that's the successful story they'd like to achieve out of this entire exercise. So I'll leave that at Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. That concludes the debate, and we now have 6 councillors in the chambers. So I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hand. Those against? It's a dead tie. The vote is 3-3. So in light of Councillor Walsh not being in the room, I'll use my casting vote to vote against the recommendation. So the recommendation is therefore lost.
Mr Mayor, in line with that, then...
Can we just call for a division on that?
Councillor Lee has called for a division, so all those in favour of the recommendation, please stand up.
In favour?
In favour.
Oh, sorry.
In favour.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Hang on.
Yeah,
We're absolutely mess at this now. Those in favour, please stand. I name Councillor Lee, Councillor Greco, Councillor Lawrence. All those against, please stand.
No,
No, right, you're out of it. This is division. You weren't here. So
No, sorry, point of order. Point of order, it's the, I believe that under our government's work law says that the vote is counted from the point of the division.
no, incorrect. Okay, so I'll now name those against. Councillor Cedars, Councillor Fontana, Councillor Villela, and I use my casting vote to vote against the policy, so that's lost. Unfortunately, Councillor Cedars, we can't accept an alternative recommendation.
Right.
It's been advised.
I was going to say that if it was possible to then have a look at the alternate options.
Option 2. Can we do that? No, we can't, unfortunately. So that item's lost. That can be dealt with under a rescission motion should councillors wish to pursue that path. Next item of consideration is 6.4.
I'll move that.
I'm happy to second it, Mr
With an
Mayor.
amendment.
Okay, Councillor Greco has moved. Councillor Villela second. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, Mr Mayor, I have an amendment or an alternate motion. And I said did an alternate motion, but I have a slight variation of that motion. And if I may, Mr Mayor, and I beg for your indulgence if I could read it out because I've only just recently prepared this, but it picks up on the previous motion that I had sent around. So I'll read out what the alternate motion is. The alternate motion reads that council conduct a full review of the policy and receive a report at the first council meeting in May. Without limiting the scope of the review, the policy should consider the pros and cons of A, deleting references to ratepayer council-funded professional development program or courses for councillors. B, supporting councillors attending conferences and training, however setting a monetary limit on courses that need to be approved by council resolution. C, decreasing the overall limit per councillor in any financial year to attend conferences and training from $40,000 to $10,000. And D, deleting any reference to council providing the mayor with a mayoral car and related fuel expenses. So it's basically seeking a report, adopting the resolution that's here. That's point one, and point two is seeking a report on
Thank
it.
you, Councillor Greco. I'm not going to ask you to speak. I'm actually going to rule against that recommendation, and I'll refer you to section 26E of the government's local law, where the motion or the amendment is irrelevant to the business item. What you're actually seeking for is a review which council has already undertaken in our current term of the expense and support policy. So I'm actually going to rule that out, so I won't accept that.
Mr Mayor, if I may, just as a point of
I've read out
order,
the section 26E, Councillor Greco.
Mr Mayor, if I
I'm happy to
may,
move the motion.
sorry?
Let's hear Councillor Greco.
Yeah, just as a point of order.
Already made a ruling, let's hear you.
Yeah, just a point of order. I sometime last year, I called for a review in relation to our councillor expense policy. The review has not been forthcoming, and therefore I've taken this opportunity with this is to seek a review in relation to this in relation to the policy. It doesn't contradict the policy in any way. It basically adopts these changes by the audit committee, but then also asks that a policy that a review be embarked on in relation to this. And Mr Mayor, just finally I'll just say, just in the previous motion, or two items ago, we adopted a report and also sought for a further report on that particular related item. So I don't see where the difference is, Mr. Mayor.
That's not a point of order, unfortunately, Councillor Greco. I think you've argued against your own point there. Quite simply, that your suggestion in relation to the amendment is in conflict with what the recommendation is by an internal audit of the Audit Committee. We've already undertaken a review, as I've mentioned, in this current term of our council and expense policy. This is simply an inclusion as a result of a full review 5 months away from a caretaker period is not good governance, and I explained that in an email and in a meeting.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'm not asking for the policy to be changed. Once again, I make the point, Mr. Mayor, all I'm asking in my resolution, in my alternate motion, is to adopt the recommendation that's here, and then basically just to, and it's just basically then asking for a review to be commenced in relation, a full review to be commenced in relation to the policy. I don't see that there been any inconsistencies there, Mr. Mayor, and I don't see the grounds that you have to actually rule out my alternate motion.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. We already have a review in process which you called for. That review has not been undertaken. As I've mentioned before, we've already undertaken a review in this current term. We can't do a review every 3 or 4 or 6 months, as you're suggesting.
On what authority do you say that, Mr. Mayor, in relation to the review?
I'm having a debate with you, Councillor Greco.
No, I'm just asking for clarification because you're making a statement, Mr. Mayor, and on what authority are you basing that?
Councillor Greco, I refer to council local law, and I've sent this to you in an email today, 26E, okay? The matter is irrelevant, and we currently have a review in process which is going to be presented to us in due course. This is simply on top of what we're deciding tonight, which is in conflict.
I'll just make the final point, Mr. Mayor.
Well,
is that when I requested a review sometime last year, that motion was not disallowed, Mr. Mayor. That motion was allowed, and now that I'm requesting the same thing, Mr. Mayor, now you're disallowing. So there's a complete inconsistency there in terms of allowing my motion for a review to take place, of which I have not heard anything yet. There's no report that's come back to us from the officers, and now you're disallowing my request for a review and allowing the chamber to determine whether we want a review or
I'm
not.
not going to have a debate with you. I've ruled out of order, and as I've mentioned, there's a review in place already, and we've already undertaken a review in our current term. We now have a recommendation there as listed. Whoever move up.
I'll move that.
Move Councillor Lawrence. Have a second. Councillor Villala. Councillor Lawrence.
Mr. Mayor, this motion deals with some revision after some, I suppose, external homework that we've been given, and internal homework about tightening up our accountabilities. This motion doesn't go to the full review of this motion, and I would note I submitted an amendment to this motion to amend the policy prior to Councillor Greco today, and that he has not taken up any of my suggestions in relation to overseas travel.
Could you stick to the systemic motion there, please, Councillor?
But I've certainly taken on board that the intent of this motion is to look at the accountability measures are tightened and are put there so we can be accountable on those things that have been raised externally by external inspectors and by external monitors, or so-called monitors. And that's what this is doing. In regards to the overall substantial thing, I'm not comfortable voting for this, which refers to overseas trips, when we already have a motion on the books saying our mayors won't frolic in tropical islands again.
I wish I could.
But I understand the limitations of that, and that my concerns on the excesses of beachside conferences, etc., will be addressed through the review later.
I hope you're not referring to being you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Villala.
Mr. Mayor.
Any further discussion or debate from councillors?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'll speak in favour of this recommendation, which was originally intended in my motion. Look, I acknowledge the work that the auditors have done, and that they've identified some gaps in our policy. But I believe that there are further gaps in the policy, and the further gaps are that we really should restrict some of the spending that is done by councillors, and that this review that has been conducted, I don't think it goes far enough. I think there's other expenses there that the councillors should not be able to engage in, and they're expenses like, for example, professional development, where up to $40,000 can be paid to councillors to basically conduct private education.
Mr. Mayor. Point of order, councillor?
No, I'm
No, okay.
I'd like to speak.
Nothing specific.
Yeah, and so I don't think that's appropriate. I think $40,000 is a bit rich. I mean, we're being hit by rate capping, and I'm in favour of maintaining the quality and the amount of services that council has. So I think we should start looking at ourselves in terms of our expense policy in order to try and reduce something. The other thing that is not included here is the mayoral car. We have a fleet of cars out there. I just don't understand in 2016 why we need to have a mayoral car. Why can't we use just one of the fleet cars, which will save the council lots of money, instead of spending money on an additional car just for the service of the mayor.
Do you have a meeting, Model?
Yeah, I mean, when I was the mayor, I set that as an example, used my own private car.
Thank you, councillor Greco. Your time is up.
And so on the basis of that, Mr Mayor, I support this. I support this policy, but I'll be flagging that I'll be putting in a recommendation, a motion in order to seek a full review of this policy. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Can you please pay attention to the screen for time limits? Councillor Sidis.
Mr Mayor, I wasn't going to speak on this, but Councillor Greco has misrepresented the situation.
Thank you, councillor.
In line with the email that I sent earlier this afternoon, in joining Councillor Greco in relation to a debate tonight, the policy is not as he had stated. In fact, on closer reading, for Councillor Junkets, $40,000 per financial year is available to each councillor. The education component is $40,000 for all 9 of us. So I think you need to have a closer look, Councillor Greco, and have your facts right. Because the first dot point in that policy relates to, in fact, 2.91, which is the conferences and training programs. 2.92 is in relation to the Council Professional Development Program. I respect your right to have your value judgment in terms of whether the policy should exist or not. But I wouldn't want
the sustained emotion. I think councillor Sidis.
I wouldn't want the point to be lost on councillors that the policy is actually skewed towards junkets and not education. And I think what's drawn
Councillor Sidis, to this actual, I know you're drifting a little bit. Please stick to this item.
I think that the policy, I agree with Councillor Greco in terms of this. The policy needs to be reviewed because it's out of date. And notwithstanding whatever review the audit committee has done, it does not have the remit of the council to actually review it. The process should be a referral back to a briefing session to come back to council for its updating. And I think that's the exclusive right of the council to determine. In this circumstance, we're merely rubber stamping someone else's process, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Sidis. Any further speakers? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's important that we actually stick to the substance of the debate as to why we're having this tonight. We did this, as Councillor Lawrence said, through a governance oversight, and it's our oversight. We brought this upon ourselves. It's important to note that we're not discussing the policy itself. That's already been adopted, that's been reviewed. What we're looking at is some potential loopholes in the policy that's not been addressed. What the amendment seeks to address is that where councillors have failed to send in their declarations, along with that, as per our adopted policy, within 14 days of the phone bill and the mobile charge and the cab charge bill arriving, then they can have that right to revoke. We have to understand that council phones and cab charge vouchers are actually ratepayers' money, and if we cannot be accounted for ratepayers' money, we should not have access to it. Just full and simple. And it saddens me that it has to come through for this, because we had 3 opportunities to fix it. First, during the monitor's term, secondly, during the audit committee's term, and thirdly, through the 2 municipal inspectors. It saddens me that some of us in this chamber did not get their act together to sign the declaration within 14 days of receiving it and be accountable to ratepayers' money. We need to be out in this chamber.
Thank you, councillor Lee. Any further debate? Councillor Walsh.
Look, I was going to propose to defer this because I think, because I don't think it's.
The debate is for or against, please, councillor.
So look, I'm remotely I guess I'm speaking against because I don't think this is this policy this review is quite is quite there is quite there yet. It was and I wouldn't mind having
Councillor Walsh, speak to the suspended motion. We're not discussing the policy.
One thing I would add though is is when we get a chance to is I'll be foreshadowing if in the event that the current ride sharing bill is passed with the Victorian Parliament, I foreshadow that I will be seeking to review the policy to allow councillors to use Uber, which saves money in
Relevance, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Walsh, to the suspended motion, please. 20 seconds.
Mr. Mayor, I feel there is a gross double standard. You do not bring Councillor Greco to the point when he started speaking about the mayoral car, despite having reflected on the chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. There's a mover wish to close the debate.
Yes, just briefly, Mr. Mayor, and I'm sure when the review comes, we'll have a chance to debate and involve the community in those wider aspects. But this is looking at the mechanics of reporting and mechanisms around basic things, expenses that councillors incur in their job in terms of phones and cab charges, and it's about the basic day-to-day thing. I'll be happy to have the debate about tropical islands and holidays later, but it is important that from the auditing profession and from the governance specialists who've come in and given us advice that we act on tightening up these things.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? I'll put that. All those in favour? Those against? I note that item is carried and Councillor Walsh has abstained from the vote, so we'll classify that all as a no.
Happy to move the next item, Mr. Mayor.
Next item is 6.5, the Darebin Ethics Committee Council's Community Monument. Moved, Councillor Villela. Seconded.
I'm happy to second with amendment.
Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Villela has moved. Councillor Lawrence, what's your amendment?
My amendment is an additional point
that was
which was circulated earlier. That council received that after consultation with the Aboriginal Community Council received a further report on the benefits of further developing Ray Bradman Gardens and adjoining council land as a spiritual and cultural healing place.
Happy with that, Councillor Villela?
I'm happy with that,
okay,
yeah.
so that item's been included. Councillor Villela, you have the floor.
Just a point of clarification. That's not. There's no onus on DEC to do anything because
no.
That's purely just to clarify that, Mr. Mayor. Look, this has come to council on a number of occasions. We're all very familiar with it. What we have here before us is a fairly detailed summary of the extensive consultation process. I want to acknowledge the great work that the officers have done in managing that consultation process, and it's been broad, it's been extensive, and I think a lot of work has been, a lot of time has been invested in just making sure that is managed appropriately. Things have taken a bit longer than planned, but that's because we really did need to follow a proper consultation process. What we have before us, Mr. Mayor, is the agreed wording. And fundamentally, it acknowledges the declaration of the UN General Assembly declaration on the victims of genocide and of the prevention of this crime. So it's fairly, all the boxes have been ticked. And just need to remind people, Mr Mayor, that this was actually full expenses undertaken by DEC. It's on council public land, but the cost of the monument and other subsequent costs have been incurred by DEC and the community. So I think it's important. Again, I thank the officers, but it will be managed. There needs to be ongoing dialogue, I think, between DEC and council officers, and that's noted here. And yes, of course, welcome point 4, the additional point. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Viola. Councillor Lawrence, a seconder. Do you wish to speak?
Yes, Mr Mayor. This has taken some time to come back to council. I'm glad we've come back with wording which more closely reflects the United Nations resolutions on this, and this really goes to the heart of the clashes of nations, the clashes of civilisations, and in fact colonial expansion, and the crimes that occur, often in the name of race, ethnicity, religion, in the processes of those nation ebbings and flowings. And so, of course, it's impossible to have this discussion in Australia without first talking about the past with the non-Aboriginal community and the Aboriginal community and the unfinished business that goes on there, and the ongoing effects of both cultural and physical genocide that did occur in parts of Australia. So that goes to that, and it also, one of the aspects of this is there is a management process, and I appreciate DEC has brought this project to us, but there's an ongoing management process to this in terms of our commitment to a harmonious community, that we can let people discuss the actions that they and their families have suffered in other places and have a mature conversation about it and go beyond some of the nationalist dialogue. Because within civil wars and within clashes of nations, there are actually other minorities within minorities, and there are majorities in minorities. And there is so much violence that you see in Syria, Sri Lanka and other places, which is complex and can't be just explained through national dialogues. So this goes to the heart, I think, of United Nations, and it will be a welcome addition.
Further speakers, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This is better, and it is an improvement. The revised proposal is an improvement. However, I still have issues with this. I'm not, and so I'm not totally comfortable to pass it tonight. In many ways, I'm troubled by. I think I have issues with the Aboriginal part, because technically it is not a recognised genocide. Now we can we can argue, as many historians have, such as Henry Reynolds, which that what happened in Australia was a
Please, I was born in Tasmania.
Yes, was a genocide. I recall that I recall whilst I was at university, and I was a history major at university, and I recall a lecture by Patrick Wolf, who argues that the stolen generation both by stealth and attempted genocide, and I recall thinking that he made a very compelling case. However, it has not been passed by the United Nations, and I don't think that's our role. I also worry about the division.
Any further debate? Councillor Gregory?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think it's worthy to say a few words on this. Look, it's been a long process. I want to thank the representatives of DEC for their hard work and their persistence and their patience in relation to this. I think it's been a very thorough process that has been gone through, both from the council's perspective and also from DEC's perspective and also from the broader community's perspective. And I think that process, even though it's taken a bit longer than what we originally thought, but I think that process has been both educational for people who were not familiar with this particular theme, particularly with the United Nations Declaration back in 1948, and then most recently last year, September last year. So I think it's been beneficial in that way. I think the other great aspect to what's been proposed there, and I think it would be, put Darebin in a position of leadership on a national basis, is the involvement of our Indigenous First Australians in relation to this monument, because and I think that's been a really good and added benefit to the monument, because it gives it very much an Australian identity, recognising what happened here with the frontier wars and the early settlement of white Australians here. So, and what I like to also say is that the process of arriving at this policy and arriving at the words for the inscription, because it's going to be there for a long time, and a lot of people are going to read it, and a lot of people are going to ponder about its significance. And I think what's been important is the inclusive manner of which the way DEC conducted itself, and also the council officers conducted themselves, in bringing everyone together to the same spot in relation to agreeing to a set of words that we all universally can adopt. So, great piece of work, great contribution from councillors, from DEC and from the council officers.
Thanks, Councillor Gregory.
Mr Mayor, can I just respond?
To
respond?
Are there any other speakers?
Because we had,
We had Councillor Walsh speaking
spoke
again.
against.
He spoke
Against.
against. You can close the debate. Councillor Lee, do you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to also speak in favour of the motion. Thanks for the additional point, because there are many aspects of our history which are uncomfortable, as clearly shown tonight, and I think it's important as the first point of reconciliation to actually recognise some of the wrongdoings of our past forebearers. And in doing so, we commend the work of DEC, but also the Aboriginal Advisory Committee and the work of our officers in consulting with the Indigenous owners of this land. It is important to actually recognise some of the displacement, dispossession of the first Australians, and I think this monument, if it is to be a healing place, a place of healing, as Councillor Lawrence suggested, is a great starting point. And more importantly, if we read through the inscription and the explanatory notes associated with it, does not name any specific race, say for the Aboriginal race, or nation or religion. So I think that's the inclusive nature of the wording that really won over my support on this particular part tonight. And it is a starting point to actually recognise the wrongdoings of the past without referencing any specific actions, but placing that as the starting point for reconciliation dialogue from this point onwards. So I wholeheartedly support that.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Lee, to close the debate. No new items, just rebuttal on any.
Yes, just I find it, I'm not too sure, Mr Mayor, whether to laugh or cry when Councillor Walsh said that this makes him feel uncomfortable because, there hasn't been deemed by the UN that there was genocide against the Indigenous people in this country. I would argue that Councillor Walsh really his words are inappropriate and misses the point. He is not a member of the Indigenous community.
How do you know that?
And he's not a member of the Indigenous community. We've consulted with the Indigenous community, and it's all about self-determination, Mr Mayor. It's all about self-determination in that if you feel, you believe that you are a victim, or your people are a victim of genocide, people have the right to that. We don't expect an academic who lives in some ivory tower to come up with some arguments about, whether it's genocide or not. That is just so totally inappropriate and misses the point and misses the general respect, Mr Mayor, that this monument and the intent of the monument has to not just the Indigenous people, but to all other victims of genocide. I'm not a victim of genocide, and I'm grateful for that. However, that does not mean that empathy is not there for those who do deem themselves to be victims of genocide. And so basically the words that Councillor Walsh shared unashamedly in this chamber, I think are offensive and are an affront to our Indigenous community and also to other victims of genocide. What this does, Mr Mayor...
10 seconds.
Yep, is if the person is deemed to be a victim of genocide, he or she has the right to use this monument as recognition of their pain and suffering. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vella. That closes the debate. I'll put that item to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously by those who are here. We'll note that Councillor Walsh was outside the chamber.
Can we note that it was unanimous?
Unanimous, yes. Councillor Regover was outside the chamber when that vote was taken. Next item of consideration is, and I do thank the contribution for the DEC members, and thank you for your patience in relation to that matter. Next item is 6.6, the Darebin Council support for refugees and asylum seekers. We have a recommendation there. Someone move that?
I'm happy to move it.
Move Councillor Lawrence. We have a second. Second Councillor Villala. Councillor Lawrence has moved with an amendment, point 5, which has been circulated. It's on the screen there now. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mr Mayor. This, I suppose, unfortunately, flows directly on from the matters we were just discussing, and in consultation with residents discussing the previous matter, you know, I came to talking to people about events that occurred in 1920s, 1940s, 1960s, 1980s, and here we move to an area where a mass migration is occurring, and there's been a response from the federal government in terms of 12,000 people. But just to put things in perspective, that mass migration is 5 million people, 4.6 million people, almost equivalent to the mass migration at the close of the Second World War. Not, as some people say, the largest mass migration since the Second World War. That was the partition of Punjab and Bengal, which was for over 14 million people displaced in one year, of which some of my relatives were people displaced. But this, given the size of the population of Syria, that it is a magnitude of human suffering and displacement that countries around the world are having to respond to. So I commend councillors and community groups who've been, DEC especially, who've been working on this, but it certainly does raise the question, when we have 7,700 people on a public housing waiting list, exactly in the northern suburbs, exactly how we're going to absorb the 3,000 or so people coming to Victoria. And we do want to open our arms to the refugees fleeing from this incredible war and do it in a meaningful way. But I did add the extra point because I think we actually have to get into action on housing.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Villala, second.
Yes, just very quickly, Mr Mayor. I just want to note, in addition to all that's been said, now we're all aware of the horrors coming out of Syria and the desperation. I think it's important to note also, Mr Mayor, that the government's taken an awful long time to process the asylum seekers that it has committed to taking, the 12,000 or so. So we haven't actually, I'm not aware of any asylum seekers actually in our community just yet. I do note, Mr Mayor, that Canada has taken in something like 20,000 and been able to process them in a very short period of time. We're taking an awful long time, and I think that's not good enough. Just want to note, when we do eventually get the asylum seekers in our community, we do have to be mindful, Mr Mayor, that there might be some monetary, we might need to look at putting some money towards whatever we do, because I do note that when DEC took on board the assisting the asylum seekers that were in our community all of a sudden, we did put money towards that program. So it's important work, but we need to be mindful that some of the partners might actually need some financial assistance. So I'm asking the officers to just alert us if that's the case, then we may need to consider it in the chamber, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lollo. Any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, just, look, Mr Mayor, I want to commend the officers in preparing this resolution, but I'd like to add a further amendment. If you look on page 26, it actually picks up on a resolution that I moved on council back in May, and also picks up on a resolution moved by Councillor Lawrence back in October. I think it picks up on all the points, but I think it just omits one point that I want to include as part of an amendment. That's point number B, which reads, display a large banner and other signage identifying that Darebin is a local government area of sanctuary for asylum seekers. All the other points have been picked up in the recommendation, and just that point has not been picked up, and I'd just like to, maybe it was just an omission by, an inadvertent omission by the officers, but just to draw that into recommendations as point number,
Move is accepted.
yeah, as point number 6. I'll speak to it very quickly. I've only got a minute or two. Look, this is a great piece of work by our council. I think it's what our council actually distinguishes itself amongst the 79 councils in the city in Victoria, and I would say also nationally, in relation to not only what we say about asylum seekers and refugees, but actually what we do for them. And we know that Darebin's had a constant history in supporting in terms of material aid, but also in sense of solidarity with asylum seekers. So it's great to see us continue on that work, and I think that what we're passing here tonight actually lifts the bar, you know, in terms of what local government can do in relation to this space. Often people sort of say, but why should council worry about this? You know, it's a national issue, and but I think it's important that we continue to beat on this ground because of our history, our tradition, and also for humanitarian reasons.
If there's no further speakers, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried.
Can it be noted as unanimous?
Noted as unanimous. I'm going to take it, thank you. Next item is 6.7, the right-of-way occupancy issue re of 25A Bruce Street and adjoining 20 Herbert Street present. Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's been foreshadowed to councillors that I have a slight alternate motion to this. But before this, I just want to seek some clarifications through you, Mr Mayor, to our directors. In the report, it mentions 25A Bruce Street that's been transgressing over the railway land, and in the alternate motion, we are to advise 20 Herbert Street. Can I just get some clarification on those two alternate addresses, please?
So actually, Mr Mayor, so the 25A has been through to the residents of the railroad via adjacent to 20.
Because of 20 Herbert's occupation of land. Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor. On that note, I will put an alternate motion up, which was circulated through to everyone through Mr Hamilton, which is the council to record its objection of the occupation of the section of the road adjacent to 20 Herbert Street and declare that section of the road adjacent to 20 Herbert Street to be required for public access, and to take action to authorise the officers to effect a council resolution in relation to that road.
So that's an amendment, Councillor Lee, yes?
It's an amendment, sorry. Is it an amendment? Would that, technically, would that be an amendment or alternate motion?
It's an amended motion.
It's the motion in front of us now.
It's the motion.
It's the motion.
It is what's in front of us.
Thank you. I'll put that.
Okay, so Councillor Lee has moved. Seconder? Do we have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Councillor Greco. Okay, Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Mr Hamilton, for the suggested way forward. As mentioned very earlier, there has been some unreasonable occupation of the land, which has necessitated the trespassing or transgressing of railway land, which obviously has some safety risks and associated dangers with that. By doing so, what this motion does is ask that the road to be reopened so that people can still access their garages and so forth without having to resort to dangerous removal.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Greco, anything further?
Look, I have nothing further to add. I think Councillor Lee has covered it in terms of his questioning that went around today, and secondly the question that occurred here and the confirmation that he got, and also I think the motion is self-explanatory.
Thank you very much. If there's no further debate, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. That concludes our reports. We now go to consideration of responses to notices of motion, general business and petitions, commencing with 7.1, Adams Reserve, response to a petition. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As foreshadowed earlier, I would like to formally put option 2 for allocation of the funding in the 2016-2017, in the budget for the barbecue, and as per the suggestion heard earlier, to install barbecue there because there isn't actually barbecue at this place.
Thank you. Can you second there?
Happy to second it, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Villela. Thank you, Councillor Villela.
Thank you, Councillor Villela. Obviously, and apologies to the petitioners who had to leave early tonight. There were a couple in the public gallery. They're a very closely working group, and they also have a number of signatures, which councillors got a copy of. And what they're looking for is a way to improve the public amenity of that particular area. It is a well-used park. There are certain areas that need to be upgraded, and I'm pleased to hear that council officers already looking at installation of a drinks fountain. But in that petition that was circulated to councillors, there's an overwhelming desire for a barbecue to be placed in that area. And I think rather than having to go to another round of consultation which would confirm the residents' wishes, I think we should just go ahead and do it.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Villela, anything further to add?
Nothing further to add,
If
Mr.
there's
Mayor.
no further discussion, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item is 7.2. Now, this was raised by Councillor McCarthy. Whilst he's not here, he has communicated to me that he's happy with the recommendation. If we can have someone move that, please.
I'm happy to move it, Mr. Mayor.
Move, Councillor Villela. Seconder, Councillor Lee. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Villela?
No, nothing to add.
There's nothing to discuss in this matter. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item has been carried. Next item is 7.3, the Green Army.
Yeah, I'm happy to move.
Moved by Councillor Walsh. Of a seconder. Councillor Lee. Councillor Walsh, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I put this as a motion, given and because I was surprised that we hadn't been doing it, given the environmental projects that we're looking at in Darebin, and the idea specifically came to me as a result in regards to the Merri Creek footbridge, which one of the residents I was speaking to about it suggested that suggested seeking Green Army funding, and obviously the Green Army is an initiative by the current coalition government in regards to local environmental projects, and I think and I certainly think we should be we should keep our eyes and ears out for funding opportunities. It's unfortunate that the Merri Creek footbridge doesn't meet the criteria, but yeah, I certainly think it's worth it.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Lee, a seconder. Do you wish to speak? There's no further discussion on the matter. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Next item is 7.4, property maintenance services for pensioners. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, look, I'll move this with with a slight amendment. Mr. Mayor, I was just checking my emails. I thought I had sent this amendment around today, but I've just checked here, and it seems like I did not send the amendment or the changes that I wanted to put. Or are they up there? Yeah, they are there. So I thought, great. No, I was just checking. Okay, look, it's up there. It's basically adding a couple of 3 points. One is to receive a further report. To reinstate the property maintenance service for pensioners with a mixture of council funding and client fees to make up part of the funding shortfall. And then secondly, in developing the options report, council will consult with relevant stakeholders, that is the pensioners and past users of the service. And thirdly, the council to receive the above options report well in time for our 2016 and 17 budget deliberations. So we're not making a decision here tonight. We're basically saying, okay, let's look at further options in how this could work, both for the council and for our pensioners, rather than just making a blanket statement of saying, no, we're not going to provide that service enough. I don't think that's a sophisticated approach. I think we're a big organisation. I'm sure we can be a little bit more creative in terms of what combinations we can come up with in relation to providing such an important service for our residents. So that's basically it. Look, I value the work that the officers did in preparing this report, and again, I think there's a real opportunity here for us, because in reading the report, yes, whilst the federal government has cut the program, we have been providing this program for a long time. I understand that, and I've had numerous complaints by pensioners saying that what happened to this particular service, and I know that pensioners were paying very, very little for the service, but the indications that I get from pensioners, and I think we've discussed this in the chamber, is that it could be that we could still keep the service by arriving at a different mix in terms of how much council puts in and how much the client puts in, that is, how much the pensioner puts in. Because a lot of pensioners and elderly people and frail people, they trust council. They trust council in providing service. They don't want to get on the phone and start calling tradies and with the fear of being ripped off because they're vulnerable and things like that. Some of them would be prepared to pay almost as much as they pay external people, but pay the council knowing that the council is not going to betray their trust and is not going to rip them off. Let's explore that space. I think there's an opportunity there for us to maybe come up with something so that we can reinstate the service and continue it on for the benefit of our pensioners and our elderly citizens.
Thank you, Councillor Gregor. I've just been alerted to some of the wording in point 2 where it says, in developing the options report, council will consult. I think we need to amend that to
may consult. I'm happy with the word may.
Yeah, may consider consulting with the relevant stakeholders. Okay, just need to be careful.
Or should consult. Should consult. No.
But that's got to be careful not directing. It's very careful.
Yeah, so, no problem.
May consider consulting.
Okay, thank you.
May consider consulting with relevant stakeholders.
Yep. Thank you.
Consulting.
Thank you for that correction.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Villallo, seconder.
Yeah, just look very quick, Mr. Mayor. I think we acknowledge that the elderly pensioners, the pensioners make up a significant cohort in our community. So, any changes that happen, it's really important, Mr. Mayor, that we communicate effectively with them. Now, the challenge for us is that there's such a diverse linguistic cohort. The CALD community is very diverse, but unless we get that communication right, there's going to be a lot of backlash, and we're going to get phone calls, etc., etc. Now, I think it's really important that we have the discussion with the community, with the elderly, and I understand that it's challenging because how do we get out there? But first of all, there needs to be an understanding in the community that federal funding is stopped, and that whole education thing, because otherwise we look like the baddies. Yep. And secondly, through that conversation and maybe some consultation, what are some other models? What would they be prepared to pay? Or what would they like council's role to be? I know in some discussions that I've had, Mr. Mayor, it's mainly been a referral. Okay, who can you refer me to that we can trust? So we need to have a meaningful discussion, Mr. Mayor, to manage the transition, but also, and we need to make sure that we send our some of our employees who do speak the language, whether it be Italian, Greek, Turkish, whatever, but to actually let the community understand exactly what's going on, so that we don't look like the baddies. But I think we need to get that right. Have the operation ready to go when we do need to communicate with the various groups. So I support this. This probably should have happened when the changes came in. But that's another story.
Thank you, councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? Carried.
Can we have a division?
Certainly made, Councillor Greco. All those in favour, please stand up for the recommendation. I name Councillor Villella, Councillor Greco, Councillor Walsh, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Lee, Councillor Peters. Those against, I name myself, Councillor Palmer. Thank you. That concludes item 7, and we now do item 8, notice of motion of 8.1, the former Ruthven Primary School site. That was lodged by Councillor Villella, and I understand Councillor Lawrence has an amendment to it.
Happy to second. Oh.
Councillor Villella?
Yeah, I have an amendment.
Councillor Villalla's moved, Councillor Greco has seconded.
Yep.
Councillor Lawrence, you have an amendment? It's on the screen, I think that was circulated.
Yeah, I have an amendment. Point 3 and 4. It relates to
Can we hear the mover first? And,
yeah, I think we'll do that. We'll hear the mover first. Councillor Villella, this was circulated.
Just a point of order, Mr Mayor. There were a number of amendments that were circulated, but I don't see them on my email, so I didn't get them on my email today. So
I don't recall that.
Perhaps there's been some sort of oversight. I didn't receive
The officers got them.
There's a number of, and that's about the third or fourth amendment by Councillor Lawrence that I didn't receive a copy of. So
sent in the morning in one batch prior to 9 o'clock.
Yes, that was sent to all councillors. I've got confirmation here. Sent at 9:44 a.m. to all councillors. Anyway, let's hear the mover.
Okay, Mr Mayor.
No, I've got a copy here, Mr. Dev. If you take my word for it, they've been circulated.
Could I just have that on the screen? Anyway, yeah. I just need to read. Okay. That's fine. Yep, amendment's fine. Look, Mr Mayor, this is pretty straightforward. There was, in this chamber, we agreed to pursue discussions with the state government to land swap some of the land that is under, that council has the title to at the former Preston Girls, to swap that with the former Ruthven Primary School. As you know, the former Ruthven Primary School is a significant public land, Mr Mayor, and there is a deficit of open space at that part of Reservoir. It's public land and it should remain in public hands. That's been the basis of the of our position and the community's position. There was extensive consultation done with the community, and they want that to remain in public hands. And so this is just formalising our position with the state government, and it's asking for you, Mayor, to write to the relevant state minister and our local member, Mr. Robin Scott. I think it's important that he is aware of it as soon as possible, requesting that we commence these discussions. I think it's fair and reasonable. I don't think we know how much the land at Preston Girls costs now. We've got an estimate. Maybe if we can't get all the land from Ruthven, maybe there could be some reasonable part of it that equates to the same monetary figure. Anyway, I think it's important that we reassert our position, more importantly the community's position, and more importantly the fact that it's government, that it's public land, whether it's local, state or federal is immaterial. It's public land, people pay their taxes and they deserve the benefit of open space in their area, especially in that part where there is a deficit. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Villella. Councillor Greco.
Mr Mayor, look, I reserve my right to speak, like that we can hear Councillor Lawrence speak in relation to the amendments that's put, and I may add some words after that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lawrence, do you wish to speak to
Well, I moved an amendment. I don't know what I can do anything on that.
No. Any further comments or discussion? It's been accepted, so yeah, it's been accepted. So any further discussion or debate from councillors? You wish to exercise your right now, Councillor Greco?
Okay. I just thought that Councillor Lawrence was going to speak in relation to the amendment.
It's been accepted. All right, if there's no further debate, I'll put that item to a vote. All those in favour? Carried.
Can we note that it's unanimous?
That's been noted. Take her over there, thank you. Next item is 8.2, a possible increase to level of rate capping.
Seconded.
Look, Mr Mayor...
Moved by Councillor Greco.
Yeah.
Do we have a seconder?
Again, Mr Mayor, I've got an amendment on that.
Okay, so move councillor Greco.
I second.
Seconded is councillor Walsh.
Okay, Mr Mayor, look, I'll
Just on
speak.
a point of order,
Yeah.
before councillor Gregory goes. Yes.
It's a terrible
Yeah, the
time.
heading is, it's terrible heading.
I'm not sure. Yeah. Now
Yeah,
I
I mean,
just pick it up.
Let's just put rate capping, that's
Yeah,
it. Keep it simple.
I think the heading is completely inappropriate, yeah.
Like the
Which is
newspaper
contrary to the
last week.
spirit of the motion, yeah. Look, just very briefly,
Unless you want to change your position, I'm happy to support you.
Councillor,
Sorry.
look, just very briefly, I think we need to be clear to the community, because at the moment we have an application which was sent in by our officers, basically requesting a possible increase over the 2.5%, right? But the council position, we need to determine that council position, and we need to give the community a commitment that we will not increase rates beyond 2.5% as being stipulated by the state government as part of its rate capping. So this motion clearly sends our intention to the Emergency Services Commissioner that irrespective of that variation that was put in by our officers, that we as a council are saying that we will keep to the 2.5% increase, and possibly, if we can, and this will depend on the budget deliberation, even deliver a rate increase much lower than that, if we can. So like that, what this motion does, it sends a clear message to the Essential Services Commission, and also a clear message to our community that they can expect something 2.5% or lower in terms of a rate increase. But having said that, I think that's going to be, as we know, that poses financial challenges for us. But I'm sure, and I'll be battling here in this chamber, that we keep our rates low, as I've said in previous years. But at the same time, we need to maintain the level and quality of services that this council provides to our community. And if we are to make savings, the savings must not come from cuts to our services. And I'm quite adamant about that, because I believe, I've been an accountant for many years, particularly an auditor. I believe that we can find savings in other parts of the organisation if we look hard enough.
Councillor Walsh, seconder.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm pleased to ask second this. It is important that we don't apply for a variation, because quite frankly, yes, it's difficult times, but when it's difficult times, we must we must look at things in terms of areas that we can save money. For example, and we mustn't, if the answer is never to should never be to raise to raise rates too much. The answer has to be to look at efficiencies and look where we can do better. Who hasn't had to do a little bit more with a little bit less in their lives? I think I think that's basic housekeeping, which we must be aware of as well. I would also foreshadow that I can't guarantee it, obviously, but I will be foreshadowing that I will be advocating for a rate increase of even less than 2.5%.
Councillor Lee.
I've got some questions through you, Mr Mayor. Two questions. First of all, my recollection of the fair rate policy is a CPI, not 2.5%. So, with the leave of you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to propose that Councillor Lawrence mentioned the amount to be CPI per annum rather than 2.5, because CPI is what the council, what the policy is, because next year's CPI might be 1.8 or 5.7. we don't want to lock ourselves in 2.5. We don't know what the CPI is for the next 3 years.
We actually haven't put that up yet.
I haven't moved the amendment yet.
Move and second the
Okay.
so we haven't moved the amendment yet.
Sure.
You going to ask questions about
Well,
it?
yeah, so am I allowed to ask questions to amendment now, or should we wait for the...
Let's now...
I'll just move the amendment as in red, as printed, with the 2.5 change to
Well, Mr Mayor, just on a
CPI.
point of order,
Yeah.
maybe the order of proceedings should be that I speak, because I'm not speaking in relation to the amendment. And then that way, once I've had my piece,
All right, let's...
Councillor
Councillor
Rice.
Seeders.
Definitely,
Let's
I'll
hear
speak.
Councillor Seeders. Very quiet tonight.
Just in terms of the policy itself, I think, you know, I'm free to say my own opinion, and that is, I think rate capping won't work. History tells us it won't work. Kennett tried it and it didn't work, and this policy will not work. What we have here is that rate increases, notwithstanding the supposed or purported rate cap, is the fact that rates will increase. Why? Because the biannual rate revaluation is in this year. Property prices in the last 2 years have gone at least something in the order of 30%. So at that base, everyone's house will increase. Consequently, their rate will increase, notwithstanding us pegging our rate budget at 2.5%. People will be screaming, as they did back then, Mr Mayor, saying that Kenneth said that this council or any other council could not increase people's rates, and yet what they saw on their notices was a market increase from what they received the year before. It's a ridiculous policy. Let's call it clearly what it is. And they'll be changing their position not before too long, because you can't have a supposed rate cap and then not have the biennial rate review frozen. And bearing in mind this, Mr Mayor, when Kenneth was Premier, it was a quadrennial review of property valuations, not biannual. The biennial was done under Brumby when he was Treasurer. So now we've got a fast-forward situation where, for instance, almost the real value, in some respects, is there, and it will be smacking people from one end of the municipality to the other. We saw this in the run-up to the 2008 council elections, and indeed we saw that in the run-up to the 2012 elections. The point is, it is designed to actually look at relinquishing council services, not keeping them, Councillor Greco, and that is the fact. That is the only way we can stay within 2.5%, because something's got to give, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Seeders. Councillor Lee.
Yes, so I just want to got a further question regarding Councillor Forrest's amendment as well. Possibly have that on the screen. I might assist.
Hasn't put it up yet, but...
okay.
Let's... Do you wish to...
I'm happy to move the motion with amended.
Amendment, okay.
With CPI replacing 2.5 for the discussion.
The second part of my question is...
I don't have a second.
Let's get some
here's the
clarification
question.
first. Yeah.
The second part of my question is to do with the 2016-2019 period, because are we effectively locking our rates in prior to any other budget adoption process?
Or future council.
Correct.
I don't like to speak, so I can't answer.
So I didn't understand the second point.
My question is really, are we in breach of our own governance laws by setting future rate increases up to 2019 without due consideration of future councils or future budgetary processes? Good point.
Happy to answer it if I get a right to speak.
I just want to seek some clarification.
Yeah, we may need to. So, look, Councillor Lyons, I'll throw it to you to respond to that, if you can.
Well,
can't,
under meeting procedure, I can't speak to an amendment till it's put.
All right, so Councillor Lyons...
Otherwise we can be here forever.
Sure, all right, Councillor Lyons.
If we're speaking to...
Are you putting this amendment to the floor?
I've put it to the
floor
floor 3-4 times.
Move that and second
Look, I'm happy to
accept it.
so we can...
Accept it?
Yeah, accept it.
Okay, Councillor Lawrence, all yours.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Look, I've sort of done this as a bit of a wake-up call about the debate about this because, I couldn't raise the dead to have a conversation before we sent in our email to request our interest in a variation. I did send an email to everyone and said we should have a special council meeting and think about it strategically before we did it. So I don't accept councils blaming officers for it because elected officials chose not to. We're on autopilot. Now the question is, yes, we can make this decision, and I understand some councils are making this decision, even as we speak, who have put in for a variation and deciding not to proceed. Tactically, But let's be honest with people. We're operating on a strategic resource plan that says there's a 5% increase in revenue every year.
It needs to be updated.
And, you know, where's the governance in that? We need to have the debate. We can, some councillors in other councils have suggested let's not buy into this rate capping debate in an election year. Let's play the populist line and wait till next year. Then we'll borrow a couple of million to patch it up, etc., etc. Well, let's have an honest debate. What is our strategic resource plans? We're meant to be like directors. We're meant to be sitting 5 and 10 year plans.
Yeah.
We know Darebin is in a position that it can probably absorb a 2.5 as long as CPI is that, and we can actually do that because we've never gone into debt. We have a very stable area, but we also have a suite of services that the Essential Services Commission wants to extinguish.
They've called it non-core.
They've called it non-core, which we believe are core, which are our core PAC services and our aged care services. We're talking about 220 plus of our staff are engaged in these services. We're talking about a core service for us. So we are in conflict with the Essential Services Commission. We can live for 1 year, but can we live for 5 years with this?
Mr Mayor, there's just a few mistakes that need to be
Mr. Mayor, I
corrected.
just want to seek a ruling from you actually, because I believe the second part of the motion in red is in conflict with the first part of the motion, because the first part of the motion is very clear. It's only about 2016-17 rate variation, whereas the second part goes beyond that to 2019. So under local laws, I believe the second part is in conflict with the first part, and I'll seek a ruling on that.
It's a separate matter.
I'm happy to address that, Mr Mayor,
I'm seeking a ruling from the Mayor.
yeah, because the strategic plan
I'm
relates to
point of order, I'm
that.
seeking a
Point of
ruling.
order, yes, yes, second.
That's the dates we've already adopted.
Yeah.
We need to discuss that. I don't know. I just...
Look, I'll make a ruling. I will accept that. It's not in direct opposition to the current motion. No, I will accept that. Yeah. And also, Councillor Lawrence has explained some of the content in relation to that as well. Councillor Villala?
Mr Mayor, there's just some corrections.
Grammar?
Sorry, just a clarification.
Councillor Lee?
So it is, the amendment is accepted?
It's accepted, yes.
Right.
Councillor Villala, some grammar?
The first line in red, it's minister, you've got minister. And yeah, that it resolves, and it, not it's resolve. It resolves to, and update is one word. So it might need to be a hyphen there.
Or is the current speaker pronounce it Minotaur?
Thanks, Councillor Walsh.
It's just difficult to read when you have update because it's actually one word.
To update, yeah, update one word, yeah. Extra source, okay, all right. Any further debate or discussion from councillors on that?
Are we talking about the amendment, Mr. Mayor?
The amendment now, yes.
Are we able to speak? I'll speak against the amendment.
Against the Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I applaud the decision and the notice of motion from Councillor Greco to cap our CPI, cap our rate rise of CPI. I think that's to be applauded, and we all know that there are certain efficiencies that we can derive from. I have a problem with the amendment in two parts. First of all, in my opinion, it contradicts directly to the intent of the motion, which is to seek only the 2016-17 rate rise and not to then bound council for the next 3 consecutive years to follow. So that in itself is direct conflict. That's point number one. The other point I have an issue with, associated with that, is that by adopting this amendment, what it actually does, it actually binds the council the next 3 years on the CPI rate rises. We are preempting council budget rate rises for the next 3 years through that amendment. And on that basis, I'm not going to accept it.
Councillor Cedars.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I welcome the amendments. I follow the logic because they were in fact raised, I think, by myself during the strategic workshop of the other week. The strategic resource plan needs to be updated. I accept Councillor Lee's point, but I think he's misconstrued the intent. It doesn't preempt what might be the agenda of the future council. we do have forward forecasting, which is embedded within our budget briefs and, of course, the strategic resource plan. In this instance, obviously it needs to be revised with respect to the 5% number. That's a fact. And I applaud the second point, because the reality is we will not be able to have the discretion to borrow, given the 2.5% if we stage that, and of course seek to maintain our present delivery of services and present staffing levels and present financial commitments. Something's got to give. You can't have everything. And we would not pretend to our community that we are presenting a magic pudding budget this financial year because it's an election year. It's preposterous. We've never done it. We've never done it in the city, in the history of this city. And the fact is, we've gone against the trend where others have tried to play populist and then stung their residents as soon as they've gotten re-elected. Disgraceful. At least we've had the decency to be upfront and honest with people in terms of what's required to run the city. If the proposition is that the community does not want us to actually deliver the range of services we're currently doing so, then let them speak at the ballot box. Presently, on present trends, the current policy that's been foisted upon us is designed to force us to relinquish the services we're delivering. Because as Councillor Lawrence rightly mentioned, the Essential Services Commission has deemed them to be non-core services. Disgraceful, I say. Shame. Because as a direct consequence, I will not be able to vote with respect to whether this council signs up to the NDIS. It'll be $4 million that we will be signing up to throwing down the
Councillor
gullet.
Cetus, we're
So that's where we're at,
Councillor Cetus,
unfortunately.
thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Any further speakers? Councillor Lower.
Mr. Speaker, I support it. I support the changes. I suppose I just want to make a point, in addition to supporting it, Mr. Mayor, is that when there's a notice of motion that comes to us, I just think when you add things like this that requires debate, might require some discussion, I think it's inappropriate. It's not breaking any local law, but you know, you can't just throw something up there that does require some debate and expect us in the matter of a couple of minutes to make a decision on it. So it's just a matter of, if you've got a point to make, the new author, you know, the particular person who adds the amendment can author a notice of motion. But, and I think that's the problem that I have with it, because there are lots of things that we need to discuss. But I don't think a notice of motion is appropriate. But, you know, the gist of it makes sense to me.
I can assure you I've been threatened by councillors not to put notice of motions. I've been told...
Thank you, Councillor.
It's not a
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Lawrence, thank you. Any further debate on the amendment?
I won't be sensitive.
Thank you, Councillor.
Oh, for goodness sake.
All those in favour?
I've got the right to reply,
Right reply, Councillor.
I just want to clarify. I think
There's no right reply.
Why is that?
Because I'm an amendment, yeah.
No, it's not an amendment. The amendment was taken into the motion.
We're voting on the amendment.
No, the amendment was taken into the motion.
You've accepted it?
Yes.
You accepted it, I voted against it, we're not voting on it.
Yeah, we're now voting.
We're voting for the amendment.
Are we voting on the amendment?
That's not clear. That was
Oh,
not clear.
sorry, because I'm voting
So
against
if you
it.
want to vote against the amendment, you can walk that out.
So just to be clear, so we're voting on
the amendment.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I misunderstood. I thought we were voting on the entirety, so I'm actually spoke against it.
Voting on the amendment to be accepted. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, so that's included and it becomes a sustaining motion then. Thank you, councillors. I'll now put that to a vote. All those in favour?
Sorry, are we talking about
The sustaining motion, yes. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you,
Yeah,
councillors.
okay.
Unanimous, voted by Councillor Walsh. Okay. Next item is 8.3, legal fees. That's from Councillor Villela.
I'm happy to second that.
Happy to second Councillor Zerko. Councillor Villela.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is pretty straightforward. I just note that a number of us have asked for this information and haven't received it. And also, I need to note in the chamber that 3 external authorities have raised this with me in various conversations. And I could not give an answer as to how much we actually spend on this particular. I think it's very important that we get our head around it. We talk a lot about the amount we spend on legal fees. We need to know the figure, and we need to know where, in fact, it's going, especially leading up to budget time, especially in light of rate capping, and especially in light of the fact that we're going to have to make some very important decisions. So I was quite alarmed to learn, Mr Mayor, that when I put forward this notice of motion, that in one particular department or one particular area, this expenditure on legal fees is not itemised. And I spoke to a number of people who are more au fait, familiar with basic accounting practices and good bookkeeping, and they were quite taken aback by that. So that speaks volumes, and maybe one of the reasons why we couldn't get the information. But we need to know not only how much money we spend on road works and which road, and you know which plant, how much we spend on plants, etc., etc. We also need to know, Mr Mayor, how much we actually spend on legal fees and the different areas of legal advice that we receive, and how much. And they need to be itemised, and I think it should be as simple as pressing in the request for that data and getting that data. But because the items in one particular department is not itemised, it needs to go back and do it all. And I think for an organisation of this size, with our responsibilities as custodians of public monies, I think it's not a good. Well, it's not good. And maybe that's why it was addressed to me by 3 different external authorities. So I think we need to get that information. That's what this calls for. There's no doubt that even amongst us council, we said, well, we spend a lot of money on legal fees. We need to know the amount. And then we can make up our mind and we can ask questions, because that's what we are elected to do, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walsh. Question?
Yeah, I've got a question. A couple of things. First thing is to Councillor Valella. Would Councillor, I'm sure she'd be happy to outline to the chamber who are these so-called external bodies, and I don't know, mate. Are they external bodies? Are they real? Are they real bodies, or perhaps they're teddy bears? I don't know. But the other.
Address the question to me, please.
The other thing is, would this be in terms of it's more of a serious question to the our governance officer, as well as my question does to Councillor Rolla does stand, but. Would we be, breaching? Are there any legal difficulties or governance difficulties with us providing this in a report? Would it be better if it came to a confidential briefing? How does I guess I'd be interested to know. A reflection on that too from Ms Stevens.
Okay, I might get that answer through the CEO, if that's all right.
Yeah, just broadly, sometimes, it's not part of my job to enter into debate. I don't know why any authority, Mr. Lewinsky asked me for a legal cost, and line by line, every line was given on the first day. I don't know why he's going and asking councillors, because he's not supposed to. It's an operational matter sometimes. And secondly, I would also say this, and every expenditure is recorded with details, with invoices, and everything can be obtained. But how we present it to various authorities like council and others depends on what it is for, what's the purpose behind it. So we'll bring the report. We'll be surprised that 90% of them are council initiated matters, even more. I need to look at the details. This is what was given to Mr. Lewinsky. And on the day one, I gave it to him on his request.
Thank you for that. Mr. Secretary, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Look, I thank Councillor Valella for bringing this to the attention of the council, because I too have asked in the past that information on legal expenses, and the information that I got back was never ever really clear to me, and really trying to go through it and trying to determine where the illegal expense emanated from, whether it emanated from council or emanated from officers, which departments it's come from and things like that. Look, I'm really pleased to hear from the CEO that we have, we have that information and we have those invoices, and so I would assume that at the press of a button, that information could be made available, and I really look forward to that, because it has been some time that we have requested that, and given that we've had to come to a council notice of motion, means that maybe that the information, the way that it was collated, maybe has not been clear. So I'm hoping that this time it will be clear. I think it's important too, apart from, because it is a big expense, because I really don't know how much it is, whether it's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, or whether it's actually in the millions. And why that's important, Council, is that we're about to enter into a budget process. We're in the budget process. The previous motion, as I move, is about having a ceiling of 2.5%, and so if the amount is of millions of dollars, we would need to know what that amount is, so that, if we need to make adjustments, so, because I would prefer, rather than paying lawyers, I would prefer to keep a service for pensioners, rather than money going out to lawyers and argue particular cases. I want the community to actually get a physical service. So if the amount is millions of dollars, I want to know that, because then I will know where to cut in terms of the budget. Okay. Otherwise, if we don't know that, then we're always left in the dark.
Thanks, Councillor Greco. Look, I think we just need to amend once, as word change in that notice of motion, is the word next needs to be removed, because it says 2nd of May. We've actually got April meetings to attend to.
Where's that, sorry?
The first sentence, that office table at the next council meeting. Next, remove the word next. Yeah. At the council meeting on 2nd of May. So it gives us.
Oh, sorry, because I did change the date, but I left the word next.
Councillor Walsh, speaking for or against?
I'm speaking for, because but with some concern, and because I am concerned that it's now getting revealed that Mr. Lewinsky may have been asking councillors about such things, and how and I am very concerned about this, given it was put here by the state.
I think because it wasn't the only one, Mr. Mayor.
I think Councillor Walsh, let's not name anyone, and please argue the any point for or against. You've had your say. You finished.
Well, that's all I wanted to say.
All right. Put it to debate. Any further debate or comments from councillors? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Just this says the data to be itemised. I mean, I'm not related or not friends with lawyers who we use, so I don't know the ins and outs of lawyers' contracts. But I imagine there's planning department, and then there's attenders that come to this council.
We'll provide all that information. Yes.
But are we getting the line-by-line supply that was given to Mr. Lewinsky?
It'll be collated in an appropriate manner for councillors to understand. Okay. If there's no further debate, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. Next item is 8.4, parking and traffic within the Darebin planning scheme. Councillor Valola.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a pretty
Seconder.
I'll second it.
Councillor Sudis. Councillor Valola, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This, as you are obviously well aware, the issue of parking and in planning applications has become a very contentious one, in that with more and more applications and increased development, the whole notion of is there sufficient parking, the wavering of parking, etc., etc. And I've mentioned a number of times on the floor that what we have in place, or the policies that we have in place, may need to be reviewed. Well, point one is the first step. My advice to officers was to, let's just start off with understanding the relationship between the current parking and traffic policy with planning applications and the planning scheme, and once we have that briefing, then as councillors we can then take the matter further. But once we need to have an understanding of how all the elements come to play. And secondly, Mr Mayor, this was, I have, and I'm sure a few of us have had concerns with the number of 2-bedroom dwellings that have come to planning. And then interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, or just the day before I wrote this notice of motion, a report was presented to the state government about the inequity in the number of homes, of new homes and apartments that were being developed, that they were not providing, they weren't family friendly, in that there's not enough 3-bedroom units and homes being built, and we've got more 1 and 2 bedrooms. So I'm thinking, I sense that at Planning Committee, and maybe we need to question whether our housing policy, which has a commitment to diversity, is actually being committed, being met. I think the trend has been that diversity has meant 1 and 2 bedrooms, you know, to make up for that demand, or to cater for that demand. And so what's happened, Mr Mayor, without the data, but I'm assuming that we're kind of forgetting about the 3-bedroom and the more family friendly. So I thought, in light of that, it's good to have a discussion from the officers whether our planning scheme is delivering a diversity of housing, in particular 3-bedroom family-friendly developments. I think we need to take stock of where we're at in terms of what the current development projections are, and whether in fact it's skewed to 1 or 2 bedrooms. I think we need to know that, because otherwise we're not meeting the commitment to a diversity of housing in our housing policy. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Lowe. A seconder wish to speak?
Flag an amendment to point 2.
Councillor Stevens?
I'll speak first.
I want to hear you speak. I want to hear you speak first.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, thanks. I welcome the notice of motion moved by Councillor Gallagher. My concern, and I think it's been shared by everyone around here, is more to do with point 1 than 2, but they're related. How are they related? The deficiency of the power of the responsible authority, namely us here, to actually control that, because it's not part of the state planning framework. So what this actually is designed to do is in the realms of advocacy. So matters arising from, if it's passed, then of course for us to lobby the state government to actually look at this quite critically. I've said this on a number of occasions, whether it's here or at planning. The reason why those things were not put in there are obvious, because what it would mean if traffic impacts were in fact a core consideration of the planning scheme, is that most of the developments would never get off the ground. That's fact. Whether you want to talk about our major thoroughfares, or you want to talk about in suburban areas in which dual occupancies might be proposed in constrained streetscapes, the problems are pretty much plain for all to see. But when saturation occurs, and we've seen that, and certainly with the types of proposals that have come to us, and we see the aerial photography in terms of presenting the site context in which the proposals are being developed, that actually just magnifies the problem immediately for the amenity of those particular residents at the coalface. With respect to the housing diversity, we do have a housing policy. I don't think it's bad, but do we have the tools to enforce a ratio of 1, 2 and 3s? So again, I think that falls into the realm of advocacy in order to give us the power to enforce our housing strategy in terms of where we'd like to go in terms of injecting pluralism in relation to new housing stock in the city.
Thank you, Councillor Curtis. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I've just got an amendment proposed on point 2. I circulated it late today.
Is that on the screen, please? 8.4.
Yeah, I think it's missing that and after 2033.
Is the mover happy with that? I think it's the valid statistics that we've used before.
I would argue also, though, Mr Mayor, that we can note them, but...
But that's what it says, council notes.
Yeah, and that's about it. Yeah, okay.
Right, thank you.
So that's item 2.2 and 3 to replace point 2.
Yeah. Okay.
So it also calls for a report on the planning committee, and the planning scheme is tracking with current applications in regards to the need of these 5 basic categories And the reason I just raise that, because again and again the falsehood is raised in this chamber regarding one-bedrooms. And they're the needs. There's actually some broad categories there. You can obviously see 3-bedroom and 1-bedroom have high future needs. And while the state laws prevent us from using housing diversity as a critical factor in determining units less than 10 units per block, that's obviously where we need to
Thanks,
go.
Councillor. The move is accepted. The second is happy with the two. Councillor Gregor?
Yeah, I just wanted to, because I had an amendment, but I just want to make sure that, because I think it's captured in point number 3, but I just want to get some clarity. So point number 3 will actually deliver us the numbers of is it the planning committee or on how the planning committee and the planning scheme, so as distinguished between the planning committee or the planning department?
This is actually to do with an email circulated some time ago and a request, and I haven't had it responded to. So again, I brought it into the chamber in regards to how the statutory planning decisions track with the planning scheme. We understand the limitations of the planning scheme, although we have had a housing policy and we have had that housing policy embedded into the MSS, but there is also a gap between
I think we need to
statutory
just change
and
the word committee to department, so So what you want, Councillor Lawrence, is what the committee's doing?
Yes, Mr Mayor. It's the committee and the functioning of the planning scheme, which is obviously administered by both officers and councillors.
Therefore, look, I'll
No, I'm sorry, Mr Mayor. Oh, sorry. Did you ask me whether I want to accept it? Number 3?
Yeah.
Oh, you've changed it to planning department? Yeah, that's right.
Just a point of clarification, Mr Mayor. I don't want to dwell this point, but it's the second time we've seen amendments that perhaps are not consistent with the original intent of the
Thank you very much. That's right. Thank you very much. And I'll go back to my point, Mr Mayor, that if someone wants to
So you're
change
not accepting it?
you know, no, I'm not actually.
So, Mr Mayor, I'll ask you to make a ruling that the motion is inconsistent with the original, that the amendment is inconsistent with the original motion, and that you disallow the amendment.
Mr Mayor, the point of the amendment is to correct some factual errors in point 2, which is unrelated to point 1. And those factual errors are matters that have been repeated again and again in this chamber.
Yeah, that is correct.
And
but
I'm trying to introduce...
Mr Mayor,
that is correct, but I'll rule it out. Thank you, Councillor Zalala. Thank you. I'm capable of making a decision. I'll let you rule that out, Councillor Lawrence, for the sake of moving on with the item, and we can deal with this in another forum, I think, in order to see clarity, accuracy and responsible decision making.
Well, I'd like to register my discontent with that ruling, Mr Mayor, because once again, introducing council policy, I shouldn't be yelled at.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'll take note of that.
and I shouldn't be stared at,
Councillor
Mr
Zalala, thank you. All right.
Just a point of order, Mr Mayor. I believe Councillor Lawrence has a right to dissent from your motion, and when that happens, we've got to actually take a vote on that matter under local law.
Yeah, point of order. My point was that it should be a simple process. We don't need to poll here. You know, there is a motion moved by Councillor Goella. There is amendment. Does Councillor Goella accept it? No, she doesn't. Then there can be someone can move.
Someone can second, Councillor. Thank you, Walsh. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just the pattern, Councillor.
I'll move
Councillor
the
Zalala,
amendment.
please. I don't want comments from the floor, please.
I'll move the amendment.
With a seconder for it.
I believe you just disallowed that. And
I disallowed it, but I'll go through the statutory process, which Councillor Walsh insists that I do, Councillor Lee. So if there's a seconder? No seconder, so that lapses. Thank you.
Yes.
We now go back to the sustaining motion. Councillor Lee?
No, just a procedural question, Mr Mayor. Under local law, I believe when Councillor Lawrence disagrees with your ruling, we actually got to take a vote on your ruling, as per our local law. Because you made a ruling and Councillor Lawrence disagreed with it.
Point of order.
Point of order, the chair has the response, not you.
No, but Councillor Walsh. He didn't move that way. Councillor Lawrence did not move that way, so then I won't be accepting it, and it's under 53 of our local government's law, dissent from the chair's ruling. Thank you. So that's not accepted.
He didn't dissent.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Okay. If there's no...
I believe, as I said earlier, I believe Councillor Lawrence has formally objected to your ruling, and under our local law, where there's dissent from your ruling, we have to take a vote. That's the point I'm seeking to clarify. Did Councillor Lawrence's dissent from your original ruling necessitate the need for a vote on your ruling?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Read it out.
It's 43.2.
The particular clause says, a councillor may move that the meeting dissent from the chairperson duly on a point of order by moving it.
I didn't move that.
Yes, he didn't move it. He expressed
And I
disappointment.
said that it was not moved by Councillor Lawrence. Is that clear now?
Mr Mayor, put the vote, please.
Yes, could you please put it to the vote,
I'll
Mr.
put it
Mayor?
back. All those in favour?
That's the original one.
Those against?
Yeah.
Of the original motion as listed by Councillor Viola. Those against? Councillor Lawrence has abstained
Abstained.
from the vote. Okay, so that's
Thank you,
moved.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. Item 8.5, Councillor McCarthy has moved this one, but unfortunately tonight he's actually asked me to defer that, so I'll use my right as chair to defer this item to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. That concludes notice of motion. We now go to item 9, urgent business, which was submitted by Councillor Lee and accepted by council for consideration this evening. So, Councillor Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Lee has moved this item. Seconded, we have.
I moved with the 3 additional dot points which were circulated by the council.
And the second is Councillor Viola. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if the actual amendments are actually on the screen, but this urgent business came about as partly because we received a call for assistance from the Safe Schools Coalition, but partly, which is my 3 latter point, response to the government's decision to gut, to use words of a particular MP, to gut the Safe Schools program announced on Friday. Now, as the report indicates, 6 Darebin schools are actually part of this program, at least one of which is the primary school. And before we get on with the hyperbole of what actually the Safe School program is, let's get to the essence of it. The essence of the Safe Schools program is to provide an environment where kids with sexuality identification issues will have the information, knowledge and support that they need in a safe environment, which is their schools. It also seeks to educate their peers and friends so as to decrease and minimize the chances of bullying of kids with sexual orientation and those who identify themselves as gay, lesbian, queer and transgender and so on. It is a very important program. It's a program that has received some national attention, perhaps disproportionate to the amount, meets the amount of funding it receives, $2 million a year. Over 200 odd schools, 6 of which are in Darebin alone. If you spread that out a lot, if you spread that $2 million across the country, you're hardly going to see a proper, a big bucket of money in any particular school. But it provides a very important service for our students who identify themselves as gay, lesbian, transgender and queer and so on. And it is important in line with our council policy that we actually support and reach out to the Safe Schools Coalition. But more importantly, we also need to applaud the indication made by the Premier, who stood out and said, if there is a cut to the federal program, then the Victorian government will step in. And I believe Queensland government has also stepped in with a similar pledge as well. What I would also like to receive is a report to this council to see whether there's any way that we can assist as well. Because we have many committees, the Education Committee, the Child Friendly Cities Committee, the Sex and Sexuality Gender Diversity Committee, all of which are supported by our key council policies. So we do need to support the Safe Schools Coalition because it is in line with our adopted policies. But more importantly, I'm of the view that the safety of our children is everybody's business in this chamber. On that basis, I move those motions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Viola, anything further to add?
No, I just want to suggest point number 3, ongoing operations and promotion, because I think we could be kind of effective in the advocacy role rather than any funding, if that's okay. So to look at both.
We've supplied with a written amendment, Mr Mayor.
It's one word, councillor.
What's the wording, councillor?
Just operations and advocacy.
Happy with that? Happy with that, okay, all right.
It's in line with it.
I think we've got the gist of that. I'll put that to Councillor Cedas.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to speak. I mean, the sentiments behind this motion, and I'll keep my comments brief, Mr Mayor.
Please.
This, where, for instance, we're going to be wrestling with this in perpetuity, it seems, in the rate capping environment. This is a non-core service, if ever there was one. My cautionary tale here for all of us is any budgetary implications will have to be considered in that light. So let us not pretend to those who are interested in this program, and whilst it's worthwhile, and make no mistake about it, it is not the realm of local government to play in this space. And we're going to be constrained, and I can tell you now, every dollar will be precious in this situation. I would foreshadow then that we will be bearing in mind in terms of the forward estimates of what impacts, in fact, will transcend this term of council into the next in terms of the diminution of services that will inevitably come. I can tell you now, we might not be here. I might not be here, but the fact is you can actually see it. This is not crystal ball gazing. If we want to keep the core services that we believe, that the Essential Services Commission believes is non-core, then guess what? Those that we believe have got lesser priority, unfortunately, will need to be cut.
Thank you, Councillor Cedas.
Can I move an amendment?
Councillor Walsh.
The words opposition leader included after Prime Minister.
Happy with that? Move it?
Yeah,
Yes?
of course.
Yeah, okay, to be included. Councillor Walsh.
Opposition leaders.
Councillor Walsh, you've got the floor.
I'm going to speak in. I'm going to speak against it. Yes.
Just a guess.
Thank you, Councillor Villela.
Yeah, exactly. I certainly don't think it qualified as urgent business. And so that's why I didn't support it earlier. It's Councillor Cedas was correct in saying it's not within our remit. This, and we shouldn't be, and that's why I don't support us. Passing this motion. It's and so it's not about whether the program is whether we support the program or not. It's about it's not within our role as local government. Bullying is a terrible thing, and it must be stamped out. And regardless of why someone is bullied, and I think all of us would agree with that. And so I don't necessarily have a issue with the program. I think there are some modifications that perhaps do need to be raised. It is clearly a very divisive issue, and there are many parents clearly who have objections to this program. I spoke to a friend of mine yesterday, Victoria's Union Senator James Patterson, who said there have been so many emails in just 1 week about it. So I think the federal government is doing the right thing by coming to a midway point in this.
Okay. Councillors, I'll put that to a vote.
No, Mr Mayor, I'd like to speak.
Speak, Councillor Gregor.
Look, given that there's been speakers against, I think it's...
Let's hear it, Councillor Gregor.
Yeah, look, very quickly, I think I'm speaking in favour of the recommendation. I think it's important that we support this recommendation. I'm thankful to Councillor Lee for bringing it to our attention. Look, we also owe it to the schools that are listed there. We've got an education committee of which Councillor Lawrence was actually, and myself were one of the promoters of that education committee, which has been operating here for a couple of years, and we've developed very, very close ties and relationships with them. And I think we owe it to those schools. They're seeking our support in relation to backing this scheme, and I think we should do that. Also, we have a LGBTI consultative committee, and also I think we owe it to them, that we support something like this. Otherwise, we're speaking, in contradictory terms. Just in relation to Councillor Cedars' point, look, I don't buy that economic rationalist argument, Councillor Cedars, about core and non-core. I mean, it's nice to fill out, it's nice to to fill ourselves with those.
It's not mine. It's not mine.
Yeah, I know it's not yours. I'm not saying it is yours. I'm saying because I don't buy that, because councils are no longer just collect rates, rubbish and roads. We're very sophisticated organisations, and anyone that tells us to reduce ourselves to this core and non-core rubbish, I think it's just they're not looking at the 21st century. Council has to live, obviously has to try and live within its means, but it's beyond just the ordinary day-to-day activities.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor, you can close the debate.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. At least one thing is clear, Councillor Walsh's consistent opposition to issues with GLBTI community.
That's Councillor Walsh. No, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Walsh, no. He actually is correct.
I asked Councillor Lee to withdraw. No, I will not.
Thank you, Sid. Thank you, Councillor Lee.
I asked Councillor Walsh. I asked
you got to email tomorrow, because I'll tell you what, I'm starting now.
Do it.
Please be seated. Thank you. Councillor Lee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I said earlier, at least one thing is clear. Councillor Walsh's consistent opposition to our policies. Councillor will recall that he was the only councillor vote against our noting of the report from the Human Rights Commission on the discrimination faced by the community.
On this matter.
On this very matter here, Mr Mayor, as I said just a minute ago, I don't buy the argument this is not council business, because the safety of our children is everybody's business, and that includes everybody in Canberra here tonight. And we have more so for us as elected councillors, because we represent the community. Let's leave it at that. But more importantly, as a parent of two children, I often wonder what happens if one of them come up to me and says, "Dad, I think I might be gay." You know what, I always say 3 words: it's okay. It is okay. More than that, I need support. He needs support.
Closing the debate, and the item is being introduced.
And this is exactly what the Safe Schools program is designed to promote, and this is exactly the reason why we support it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against?
Can we call
that
it
item is carried. Councillor Greco's called for a division. All those in favour, please stand. I name Councillor Lee, Councillor Cedars, Councillor Fontana, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco, Councillor Varela. Those against, please stand. I name Councillor Walsh. Thank you, councillors. That concludes urgent business. We now have general business. We have one item.
Mr Mayor, in relation to this item, I'm willing to withdraw it, because at the council weekend, I believe there was a commitment given that we would receive stuff in relation to that. So
thank you, Councillor Greco, for withdrawing that item. Next item is item 11, records of councillors, Assembly of Councillors. They're listed between page 62 and 72. Move Councillor Cedars, second Councillor Lawrence. All those in favour? That's all those in favour. Yes. Those in. Thank you. All those. Thank you. That's been voted on unanimously.
Mr Mayor.
Yes, Councillor.
I'll move that we go into camera.
We've got item 12 reports by mayors and councillors. So I'll move that. Councillor Cedars, move that. Second, Councillor Lee. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour. That's carried. We now go to items consideration.
Number 13.